Right now I live in Lancaster, Ohio, but I grew up halfway between Hilliard and Dublin. So this is my stomping ground. And I've got some pictures here. I grew up on a farm in Hilliard, a 10-acre dairy farm, and then my dad wanted to go camping in the worst way, but he married my mom, who was a city mouse, and he took us camping up to Lake Erie, probably in the late 50s, in one of those big canvas tents. He put shower curtains on the grass, and we didn't have sleeping bags. We just had pillows and blankets. And when we got home, my mom said she would never go again if she ever had to sleep on the ground. So he took that tent and he built this little camper here. And after that, we went camping for like the next 20 years, almost every weekend. They went in the wintertime. I didn't like being cold, so I stayed home. But there's some of that, you can pass that around if you want. Those are just some of the photos of me as a kid in the outdoors that I made into a little quilt.
So he built that camper?
He built that camper. That was his first one. Then he built another one, which he called the Gissif, which was our last name, Fassig, backwards. So we had the Gissif 1 and the Gissif 2.
Okay, and this is, and you're in the foreground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I don't look very happy in that picture, and my mom would force me to have my hair brushed in the morning, and it was all snarled up, and I was always in a bad mood, or being yelled at for talking too much. Can you imagine? So that was that. But on this farm that we had, you know, I wish children had the life that we had, because I was talking earlier about as long as we showed up for our meals on time and my mom knew that we weren't dead, she really didn't care where we were or what we were doing, and we explored. We were all over the place, and it gave us a sense of freedom, and also it was a place to experience the natural world in our own backyard. You know, and one thing I learned is social work. You never treat your family or friends because you have blind spots, and the same thing about your own self. So I did have an aha moment. I like to listen to podcasts when I'm in the studio. And one day I was listening to this podcast by the Free Flow Institute, and Joe Wilkins, and he is a poet, he's a creative writer, and he's also the director of creative writing at Eastern Oregon University. But he's going to talk about the layers of landscape. And you know, I kind of got a chill just hearing those words, like what does that mean? And he started talking about all these aspects of landscape. And the more he talked, the more I knew that's what this was all about. That's why the name Reconsidered. I had to reconsider what I thought was a landscape, because most people think of it as a pretty picture, and it's way, way more than that. The first layer, and if you also, I guess I should mention, all of my work is layered. I just love layers, and sometimes there might be 10 layers on a piece. So we've got the layered landscape and layering going in my work. That is the parallel process. So the first one was the embodied landscape. Now, he grew up on his farm and I grew up on mine, and I knew exactly what he was talking about. This is what your 5 senses, what you hear, what you see, what you smell, what you taste, and how does that make your body feel? Because emotions come out about that. And that was my very first idea of what landscape was. You know, we had chickens, I could hear the rooster, I could hear the sound of the winter limbs scratching on my bedroom window, which was pretty scary. I could hear the kids yelling and playing in our yard because we had a tree house and they all wanted to be at our house. The smell of little puppies and kittens that we carried around, the smell of my dad making bread in the evening, and we would all eat every bit of that, so the taste of that. Picking blackberries, chewing on weeds, all the stuff you do as a kid out in the country. So that really, I understood that. But that was just the first building block on which all the rest of this work has come from. The next one is a mythological landscape, and that is the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are as a people. And since a good bit of my work is about the Western United States, or the American West, I looked up some of these myths that we tell ourselves about who we are, and I think they'll resonate with you when you hear them. And they come from Yale University. I didn't make them up, but they, you know, I grew up in the 50s when we watched Westerns until, you know, it was almost time for dinner. So the one myth is the frontier, this notion that Europeans came to America, they conquered the land, they survived the weather, they were brave and independent, They fought barbaric Indians and won. And then this notion that the pioneers built a democratic society, even though the Native Americans already had one hundreds of years before they ever came onto this rock here. This idea that cowboys saved the day and then right off into the West. The notion that there's a clear-cut good guys and bad guys between cowboys and Indians. Simple. The notion of manifest destiny, that God gave us the God-given right to expand throughout this country, that we are a superior power to all the peoples that were already living here, and we were there to lead them out of the dark. At the same time, we took all their land. And, you know, the history of the West is extremely, extremely complicated, and it still is today with everything going on there. But we like those myths because they make us feel good, and it makes everything nice and simple. So that is one of the, that really resonated with me. The more I'm out there, the more I understand all of this. Who or what came before? What happened here? How has the meaning of that thing shifted over time? How has the landscape affected other people? What marks have been left on the land, and what marks has the land left on us? Again, those are things I've contemplated for a long time as I'm hiking, but to see those words written down. Ecological landscape, the notion that everything in the landscape is connected, and how those connections are now being broken is another thing that I struggle with almost every time I go out in the woods. And then the last one is just the metaphorical landscape. What possible meanings does landscape have for us, and what does it tell us about who we are, and what does it tell us about other people? This piece in that great big one, when you come in, this is what I'm calling an ocean cyanotype, where you treat, we use upcycled fabrics. This is an old tablecloth. We laid it in the ocean, we just anchored it with some rocks, and then as the waves come up, they leave, you can come up closer, they leave all these marks on there, and then I accentuated those marks with these brushes, and I had to really experiment with that to get acrylic paint to stick on there, and I finally had to spray a fixative on it to keep it from being sucked into the fabric. But that's what left. Well, these little marks here, that's just from the ocean. And so then I had silk screens. I made, who knew you could dry seaweed like you can press flowers? Yeah. I did not know that. So we dried it, I put them in books and brought them home, and I made silk screens out of them and screened all these seaweeds on there. And then there's all those, they call them stripy pebbles. So this is just some, I don't know, polyester fabric I had that I played around with and then just cut shapes out of. And then they're real heavily beaded. If this is hung in a room like this with great lighting, they just sparkle. And then I can show you these. These are some of the marks you can make with these cool things.
Beautiful.
I have made some, but mine aren't gorgeous. Mine look like they're functional. Yours
Oh,
look like
these
I
are
put them on
functional.
the wall.
Oh, those look like
These
art.
look like
Yeah,
artworks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are gorgeous. Look at this.
I love them.
When my friend from
We want to come and live at your house.
well, I do have a lot of fun. Is that stuff we found? That's just some grasses that were growing there, a piece of driftwood, some feather, birch bark. This one's a gull feather, another piece of driftwood, and then this is just a piece of, there's rope that's plastic everywhere. So the idea with these is you really have very little control, so they're great for mark making. Like this is the sketchbook I did up there, which is colors on the background, and